Alright, so in our last lesson we went over basic data structures and types, and in this lesson we're going to go over functions and exactly what functions are in Python. So functions are a way to kind of group your code to perform a certain task. Functions, just like mathematical functions, have parameters. You can think of them as being like variables that you input into an equation or into a function in this case, and then you can either have void functions where you don't necessarily return a value, or you can have functions that return different data types. So you can return strings, you can return integers, floats, etc. So looking at this function over here, we have the way you write a function in Python is that you have always start with def. Def basically means we're defining that function. And then we give it a name. In this case, this function over here, this code snippet, is about finding out whether or not a number is prime. So we can do that by putting in the number that we want to determine is prime or not as a parameter. And our parameters will always go inside of these parentheses after the function name. Note that you can either have parameterless functions that don't take anything in, so you're just going to have like an empty parentheses, or you can have something inside. You can have one thing, multiple things, etc., and those are your parameters. So okay, let's look at the architecture of this function, right? So we defined it, and then over here, basically the way that you can determine if a number is prime or not is that you can check all of its factors. And a number's factors are always going to be less than the number itself, right? So you can basically check every number that is less than that number, right? And before we go into that, just what defines something as being prime is if it's only divisible by itself and the number 1. So what we can do is we can check the converse of that and just see if something is not prime, right? And we can exhaustively search to figure out if that number is not prime or not. So what we're doing here is are basically iterating through all the numbers from 2 to 1 minus that number, right? Where we said that the upper bound is exclusive, right? So we just check from 2 to 1 minus our number of interest. And then we do the modulus operator. And again, what the modulus operator does is it will give you the remainder. And we know a number is a factor of another number only if and only if, this number or any number divided by the potential factor gives you a remainder of 0. That means that it is a factor, right? So if that's the case, right, and that number is not 1 or the number that we're dividing itself, right, that means that, oh, this number actually has a factor that's not 1 or itself. That means that it's not prime. So we print it's not prime, and then when we return is just a way to kind of break out of a function. So when you pass the return, it'll just break out of the function and continue outside of your function, right? So let's say that we've searched everything from 2 up until 1 minus that number, right? And we have not satisfied this at all. We haven't satisfied this, right? That means that we exhausted all our options. So that means that the only other thing is that that number is prime, right? That means that, yeah, the only thing that it's divisible by is 1 and itself. And then we can print, oh, this number is prime, and we can return. So is prime is, again, the way you actually call the function then, right? So here we just define the function. We don't actually execute it until we call it. So you can call it, and basically you just call the function by its name, just write its name, and then you pass in whatever your parameter was. You can think about num as being a placeholder when we're actually defining the function, but then when you actually call the function, then you have to actually put in numbers, right? So the thing about Python is that you don't have to actually declare the function, the type of the variable that you're inputting in. So you don't have to say, oh, int 11 or int 72. You can just say 1172, and then the Python program knows, oh, those are integers because they don't have decimal points. Very self-explanatory. This function, I think, will also work with floats. But obviously, prime numbers have to be integers. So, well, I don't know. That's a good question. How about you leave your answers in the comments below? Are prime numbers only integer numbers? I don't think so, because you can have like 1.00, which is a float, and it's still, well, no one's not prime, but like 3.00 is prime, and that is a decimal. So yeah. Right. I think that's it for functions. This is a very simple one. We'll be using functions throughout the rest of this course. So yeah, stay tuned for the next one. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in.